Hello and welcome to Monday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic. Now today I can tell you the wizard is back. So those of you who follow the channel may know that a couple of weeks ago I released a video entitled "This Sudoku was made by a wizard." That's trotting along at something like 400,000 views at the moment. It's a very popular video because the Sudoku was indeed made by the wizard Rishi Puri, the Indian solver and setter. And the puzzle was quite extraordinary, a quite beautiful example of using symmetry to construct a Sudoku. And Rishi recommended to me at the time that we might like to take a look at this puzzle, which also dates back to 2013. Now, there must have been something in the water in 2013 because there are the most incredible sort of back catalogue of puzzles we've been doing on the channel over the last few weeks. And this puzzle is called an even-odd skyscraper Sudoku. And I'm going to talk through the rules in a moment, but I wanted to mention that those of you who follow the channel because of the crosswords, Mark won the Times Crossword Championship last weekend for the 11th time, a lot of times, and we thought we might do something a bit different to sort of celebrate that. So if you guys have any questions for Mark or favourite clues you'd like him to solve, then we're going to do a Q&A. So I'm going to ask him the questions that you want answered. And now this is a pretty unique opportunity to ask somebody who's, I think, widely regarded as the greatest cryptic crossword solver there has ever lived, about how they do it. So send your questions in the comments to this video, please, and yeah, we'll try and get through as many of them as we can in an upcoming edition of Cracking the Cryptic. Now, back onto this puzzle. You can see, I mean, it's a beautiful looking puzzle, not many givens. What do the grey and the white squares mean? Well, as I say, this is an even-odd skyscraper Sudoku. So you can see in the middle of the grid is a normal Sudoku grid, and we're going to have to fill that in completely normally. Now, grey squares have to be even digits, and white squares have to be odd digits. Okay, so that is one of the criteria. Now, you'll also note that outside the grid, we've also got white and grey squares. Now, these also conform to those rules, so grey squares outside the grid have to be even, white squares have to be odd. But these numbers that are going to appear outside the grid have to obey skyscrapers rules. Now, if you haven't done a skyscrapers puzzle, that's going to sound confusing. So let me show you what a skyscrapers puzzle is. Here we go. So this is, I think, quite a good visual representation of what a skyscrapers puzzle looks like. So as we populate the middle of the grid with numbers, each number represents a building height. So you can see in this simple example, 3 would be the biggest building, and that would be a skyscraper of size 3. And what the numbers outside the grid are telling you is how many skyscrapers could be viewed by a person sort of standing looking in this direction. So you can see in this instance there would be a number 3 because the 1 skyscraper could be seen, the 2 skyscraper could be seen, and the 3 skyscraper could be seen. Whereas if this guy is looking from this direction, he sees an immediate 3 skyscraper, but he can't see behind the 3 skyscraper. So that's why his clue would be a 1. Similarly, this guy would see, he could see the 2 skyscraper, he could see the 3 skyscraper, but the 1 skyscraper would be hidden. Now, obviously, in a Sudoku, that's rather more difficult because the numbers go from 1 to 9. So 9 is the biggest skyscraper, 1 is the smallest skyscraper, and apparently we can solve this puzzle just from this information. That's what I'm going to try and do for you now. Now, I suspect this might be a long video because I've not done one of these, to my knowledge, ever before. I've done skyscrapers puzzles, but I've not mixed them with Sudoku very often, except when I did Laura Solar's puzzle recently, which was a bonkers variation, impossibly difficult. I think you can find that on the channel if you want to, under the hardest variant we've ever seen. Now, I hope this won't be that difficult, but we shall have to see. Now, if you want to have a go, and I do recommend it, Rishi's puzzles, as I say, they're very popular and brilliant, then click on the link under the video, and that will take you to our webpage where you should see something very similar to what I'm looking at here. Okay, brief hiatus there. I had to pause the video because we are looking after a dog today, and the dog decided to go completely manic for a while, and so I had to go and help out with that. So I'm back now, about to start the puzzle. Now we can start immediately. I can see we can write a 6 into this square because of obviously we know none of these even digit squares can be a 6, so the 6 must go there. So one of those must be a 6. 9 must be in one of these 2 squares, therefore 9 must be in one of those 3 squares there. But we can use the skyscraper logic, can't we? Because this is an even number. So there's no way I can put a 9 on the border here, because if I do, this square would always have to be a 1. 9 is the biggest skyscraper, so if it's right on the edge, you always have to have a 1 next to it. So that's not a 9. Now we can do the same thing down here, look. We know the 9 is in one of the odd cells, but this square and this square are both next to even digits, so I can't put a 1 into this square or this square, so the 9 cannot be in either of those positions. The 9 must be one of those 3 squares. Now that's interesting, because now the 9s in this 3x3 box are in column 7 and column 8, and ditto in this 3x3 box, also in column 7 and column 8. So the 9 must be in column 9 in the top right hand box. Now this one could be a 1 this time, or it could be a 3, so that's not going to be that helpful. But here, look, the 9 is not in one of those squares. It can't go here because it's next to an even digit, so the 9 is in one of those cells. Oh, lovely, look, this box has an identical configuration to this one. So one of the features of Rishi's puzzle that we did a couple of weeks ago was symmetry. And look at the arrangement around the edge here. It's this and the pattern internal to the Sudoku are completely symmetrical. So the 9 must be in one of those cells. And now look, we get exactly the same logic down here we've got over here. 9's locked into row 2 and row 3 in 2 different 3x3 boxes. There's no way this square can be a 9. And if you're not seeing that immediately, just pause the video and work it through. If this is a 9, you can see this square would be a 9, and now there's nowhere left to put a 9 in this box. So this is not 9, this must be 9. That's interesting as well. That square can't be a 9 for a different reason. If this is a 9, we know this cell would have to be lower than a 9, so this skyscraper number would have to be a 2, and this is an odd number, so it cannot be a 2. Oops. Hang on. Hang on, though, I can use that logic of this not being a 9. I can use it up here. That can't be a 9, because if this is a 9, this square will be lower than a 9, and this must always be a 2. So neither of those squares can be a 9. Obviously, this can't be a 9 because this cell would have to be a 2. So that is a 9, which means that's a 9. Whoops, I didn't want to do that pencil marking. I want to do corner pencil marking. This could be a 1 or a 3. Oh, but this box is the same logic. Neither of those squares can be a 9 because that's ruled out as neither of these 2 squares can be a 2. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Then this is a 9. So nearly. We nearly got somewhere. Look, now we can rule out a 9 from these squares, so the 9 must be in one of 3 positions. But in each of these 3 sort of options, you can see that the outside digit is odd, and that's all okay. So So we can start filling in some of the skyscraper numbers though. So I'm going to do that. That's going to make me feel like I'm making progress. That has to be an even number, so that must be a 2 given the position of the 9. That must be a 2 for the same reason. That must be a 3. Obviously it can't be a 1, or the 9 would have to be adjacent. And it can't be a 5 because there aren't enough digits before the 9. This, no, that could be a 1 or a 3. Right, so 5 must be in one of those squares from this 5 in the centre, so there's a 5 in one of those 3 positions. And in normal skyscrapers, you tend to work down the digits. So you start with the highest skyscraper and try and work out where you can put that, and then you go down to the next number. So I'm going to try that here. Where can 8s go? Is there a restriction we can deduce about the position of 8s? That's an 8, that can be a 2, that's completely fine. That can't be an 8 because that would force this to be a 2, so that it's not brilliant, is it? Oh, but that can't be an 8 because again, if we have an 8 on the boundary like this, that always has to be a 2 because there's always going to be 2 skyscrapers only seen. So that's not an 8. That's not an 8. That's not an 8. That's not an 8, and that's an 8. Wow. Okay. So we oops. So now there's an 8 in one of these 2 squares. Now this is interesting as well because this square cannot be an 8 because if it is, because the 9 is to the right here, we know that this cell, if this is an 8, this cell would have to be lower than an 8. And this would have to be a 3, and it can't be because it's even. So this is not an 8. This is an 8. Now one of those 2 is an 8. Now that could be a 2, or it could be a 4. Okay, so that's no good, but maybe we can... Yes, we can. Look, the symmetry in this arrangement means that once we get something up here, we can apply the same logic down here and write in an 8 there. That's an 8. That gives us the 8 there. Now, can we do anything? Can this can't be an 8, otherwise this would have to be odd. And this can't be an 8 because then this would have to be odd. Therefore, that's an 8. We're going to finish the 8s, I think. Or are we? There must be an 8 in one of those positions. There must be an 8 in one of those positions. This one can't be an 8 because that would force that to be odd. So we do get another 8. That means there's an 8 in one of these 2 squares. But again, this square cannot be an 8 because again that would have to be an odd number and it can't be, so this is not an 8, this is the 8, therefore this is the 8, and we have done the 8s. It's a very clever puzzle, this. It's more of a puzzle than a Sudoku in many ways. I'm not sure, maybe I'm not using the Sudoku logic enough, but it's damn clever. Right, well we should look at 7s of course. So what's that going to tell us? Well, you can see immediately that square can't be a 7, because if it is, because the 8 and the 9 are in order, this would have to be a 3, which it can't be. So the 7 is in one of those squares. But look, now this one is interesting. This one can't be a 7, because the 8 is the other side of the 9. If this is a 7, this skyscraper would have to be a 2 coming from this direction, so that's not So the 7 is in one of those two positions. This can't be a 7, otherwise this would have to be a 2, because again the 8 is to the left of the 9. My goodness, so now can we get something good out of this? So the 7 is in one of those three squares. So this one, well, this one can't be a 7 because you have to look from this direction. If this is a 7, this digit would always be lower than a 7 because there's already an 8 and a 9 in the row. So this would always be a 4 into this square, and it can't be a 4 because it's odd. So this is not 7. Now, this has to be odd. So, this has to be odd. So if this is a 7, the 9 would have to be here, because otherwise it would be 7, 8, 9, and that would be a 4. So this, if this is a 7, this has to be a 9, and then it can work with whatever I put into that cell. Okay, well that's fine. But as we've locked the 7 into row 2, and this 7, this square is a 7. So the 7 is in one of those cells. 7 is in one of these three cells. Now I'm going to check the logic down here because these two are so similar. So it's going to be this square, yes. We've got the same logic going on. Looking at it this vertically, if I put a 7 in here, this always has to be even, and it isn't. So this is not 7. So the 7 must be in one of those squares. If that's a 7, that can be a 3. If this is a 7, it has to be a 2. That's a shame. That is a shame. If this is a 7, this would be a 3. That's fine. If this is a... now this is better actually. There's more of a restriction here because we know the 9 is to the left of the 8. Let's look at this direction. If this is a 7, we know that this has to be a 4 because this is always going to be lower than 7, 8 and 9. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, wherever the 9 goes. So that is not 7. This is 7. So that's not 7. So one of these two is a 7. Now can we detect... So now this must be a 4. And oh dear, I'm finding this very difficult. I feel this is... Now this number here, that's got to be 1, 2, 3, it's odd. So this is a number bigger than a 3, this must be a 5. So if this is a 7, oh, hang on, yes, I can do the logic on the 7s here. If this is a 7, I know the 9 is beyond the 8, so this would always be a 4, and it's not, so that's not a 7. Oh goodness, so that is a 7. Now there's a 7 in one of those 3 squares. Can't remember if I could restrict that any further. But I can now do logic here because I needed to avoid, if I put the 9 here, this is always a 4-size skyscraper. So the 9 is not down at the bottom there. The 9 must be in this square. Therefore that's a 1. This must be a 9. This must be a 9. Therefore this must be a 7. This must be 3. It's the biggest odd number I could make that. This also must be 3. This can be just about anything because the 8 and the 9 are so far away. But this has to be 3. And this is totally open because we can put whatever we want into that square. Right, goodness me. This has to be 3. And again, this square is completely, well, it's not completely open because of the 5, I suppose. So maybe now I have to look at 6s. Okay, let's look at 6s. So if I put if the 6 is in this position, doesn't this always have to be even? Because it will go 6, 7, it'll go 1, 2, 7 and the 9. So the 6 is not here, the 6 is in one of those 2 squares. Now that is a bit helpful because the 6 in this box is also locked into row 1 and row 3. In fact, that one can never be a 6 or the 5 can't work. So the 6 is in one of those 2 positions. If this is a 6, we know this can't be a 7. So this would have to be 1, 2, 3, which is fine. That's absolutely fine. 1, 2, 3, that's fine. Okay, so the 6 is in one of those 2 positions. Let's fill in a bit more of the border. That must be a 2. That must be a 3. That one is even. So that must be a 4, I think, because we know that it must be at least 3 because we cannot put a number bigger than a 7 into either of these squares. So this is a 4. So this must be increasing, which means this cannot be a 6, which means the 6 is in one of those squares. There's some logic. Does that help us? Yes, because there's a 6. Right, that means that's a 6. 6, that's a 6. That's a 6. 6 must be in one of those 2 positions. Now let's study these positions. 6, 8, 9 is fine. 6 here would... no, 6 here is not fine, because the 7 would have to be between the 6 and the 8, and this would have to be a 4. How clever is this? It is just stunning. Oh yes, now we're going to get the 6s placed. That's not... I think we've done the 6s. That must be 2, 4 here. This must be a 3. This must be a 2. That's working, isn't it? Now this is odd. So that must be 3. That's got to be 2. We know this number is less than 6. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3. This should be a 4. That must be a 3. Again, we know these 2 must be less than 7. And we can't get as high as 5. This is a 2. 1, 2, 3. This must be a 3. This must be a 3. That one, ooh, that one's a bit harder, I think. That must be a 2. That must be a 3. That must be a 3. That's a 1. Don't know about that one. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of the skyscraper clues done though. That's good. Right, so what should we be doing now? I see what we can do. Let's look at these pincering 3s. And the reason these are interesting is that these rows and columns work the same way. Now, if I try and put a 1 in either of those squares, these skyscrapers have to be 4s, and they cannot be. So the 1 is simply not in those positions in this box. This is a 1. Moves the 1s over here into one of these squares. The 1 must be in one of those two positions. One of those two positions. Now, I wonder whether I have to spot some symmetry here. 2, 3. So we know this is a 2, 4. We know this is a 2, 4. So if this is a 4, this has to be a 5. If this is a 2, if this is a 2, this can't be a 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we mustn't interrupt. So the but if this is a 4, sorry, so I'm being really slow and inarticulate here. If this is a 4, this simply has to be a 5. That's one option. If on the other hand this is 2, I've got to be really careful. This could still be a 5, that's absolutely fine. But if this is a 2, this could also be a 1. But it can't be a 1 because the 1's here. And it cannot be a 3. So doesn't this always have to be a 5? I think that's right. I mean, I went through it twice and it didn't strike me as wrong. So if that's true, that's a 5. That's a 5. That's a 5. That's a 1. That's a 1. This is not 5. There must be a 3. This must be a 3, 7 pair. That 2 means that resolves that. We can't make this a 3, otherwise the skyscraper becomes a 3. This is a 7, this is a 3. Therefore this is a 7, therefore this is a 7. Wow. This is a 1 and a this is not 7. This is a 1 and a 3. This is a 2 and a 4. This is a 3. This is a 3, and I've got to be careful here. 3, 7, 9. 3, 7, 9 is the skyscraper that we need to form. So I cannot put a number bigger than a 3 into this square. And the options include 4, so the 4 simply must go down there, and that resolves the 4 and the 2. Which means this is a 2 and this is a 4. 3, 5 into those positions. This square here must be a 3. Now again, we've got to be a little bit careful probably, haven't we? We've got 2 and 4, I think, to place into these two squares. So if I put a 2 in here, this becomes a 4. So this is the 4, this is the 2. Is that working? 1, 2, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. Which means this is a 2 and this is a 4. That resolves the central 4 and the 2. That must be a 1 or a 5 because of the 1, 3, 5 here. And can we do any logic to resolve all this? I'm sure that we can. You've probably all spotted it already. I have to say this is an incredibly slow solve, but I've still been absolutely... I don't feel I've butchered it at all. It's just a difficult puzzle. Now we can do the 4 and the 2, which resolves the 2 and the 4, which resolves this 2 and 4. Let's check the 5 works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. 1, 2, 3. That's working. Still don't know what this is. 1, 3, and 5 into this. 2, 5. I need this to be even though, so I need to be a bit careful about this. This can never be a 5, because if it is, 1, 2, 3 would be the total, so that's not a 5. That means the 5 is in one of those squares. This 3 is very useful. If I make this square a 1, then 1, 2, 3, 4 is the size of my skyscraper. So this is not 1, this is 5. That must be 1. This must be a 3, 7 pair. This must be a 1. Three, 5 here. That should be, oh, that's fixable by the 5 in the middle, which I hadn't spotted. 3, 1, 3, 7, 3. I really hope I've not made a mistake here. I'm going to be so upset with myself. 1, 5. I think that's the Sudoku done. Now, just a quick note that our checker won't work because this is not a standard Sudoku, so don't worry about it if you click at the end and it says no, this is a totally incorrect puzzle. Hopefully your solution will look like mine. Yeah, oh, that's 7. I missed it. 1, 2, 3. That's a 4. I'll just do a quick scan, but I'm confident this is right. It felt like it went okay. What a beautiful puzzle again. It's taken me ages. It took me ages, but I loved every minute of it. Gorgeous. Sensational puzzle from the wizard, Rishi Puri again. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Do let us know in the comments. Do let us have the questions for Mark on solving crosswords in preparation for that video on his solving technique. And we'll be back soon with another edition of Cracking the Cryptic.